Lena Matthews had always been a woman of substance, a decorated veteran of the Air Force with more than 30 years of service. She had climbed through the ranks and earned every accolade she had received. Today, however, she wasn't in her military uniform. She wore a simple navy blue dress and a pair of practical shoes, blending in with the crowd as she arrived early for the national security conference that she had been tasked to lead. Lena preferred this. She didn't need the flashy uniform to remind anyone of her authority. In fact, sometimes she preferred being treated like everyone else. It kept her focused, sharp. She had been through enough to know that people would judge her on her actions, not her clothes. As Lena approached the entrance to the conference hall, she noticed a young police officer stationed near the door. His name was Michael Owens, a man in his early 30s. He stood tall, his face stern, his posture rigid. He was clearly new to his role, his eagerness to assert authority palpable. As Lena walked toward the entrance, she met his eyes, offering a polite nod, a silent acknowledgement of his duty. Michael raised his hand immediately, stopping her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Where do you think you're going?" Lena paused, surprised by his tone. "I'm here for the conference. I'm involved in the planning," she explained calmly, trying to keep her tone neutral. Michael frowned, scanning her from head to toe. "This event isn't open to just anyone, especially not to people who don't look the part," he sneered. Lena's smile didn't waver. "I'm Colonel Lena Matthews. If you check the list, you'll find my name. I'm overseeing today's discussions." Michael's face contorted into a smirk. "Colonel, huh? You don't look like one." He laughed derisively. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. You'd better turn around before I have to call for backup." Lena's heart beat steadily, her years of experience under pressure kicking in. She took a deep breath, choosing to remain calm. "You can check my identification," she said, her voice controlled. "Or you can call whoever you need to, but I have a job to do here." Instead of listening, Michael stepped forward, blocking her path. "I don't think you understand. This is a secure area. I'm not letting anyone in without proper clearance," he said, his voice growing louder. Lena felt the growing frustration of being underestimated, but she held her ground. "I'm asking you to do your job, Officer Owens," she said firmly. The tension between them thickened. Michael's face flushed with arrogance as he spat back. "You think I'm going to just let you through? You must think you're something special." At that moment, Lena's patience began to wear thin. She was used to facing prejudice, to people doubting her qualifications based on her appearance or gender. But this was different. The condescension in Michael's words was more than just dismissive. It was insulting. "I'll ask you one last time," she said, her voice low but commanding. "Either you check my identity or I'll have you reported." Michael was unmoved. "You've been warned," he growled. "Leave now or I'll call for backup." Lena stood still, her mind racing. She knew that escalating the situation wouldn't help anyone, but she also couldn't allow this officer to continue disrespecting her. Then, in an unexpected move, Michael's hand dropped to his belt. He pulled out his service weapon and pointed it directly at her. The air around them seemed to freeze. The surrounding crowd gasped, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Lena's expression remained stoic, though inside, her training kicked in. "Officer Owens," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you are making a grave mistake. Put the gun down now." The officer's finger tightened on the trigger, his confidence growing. "I don't care who you are. I'm in charge here." Lena stood unmoved, her eyes locked on his. In that moment, she saw something more than just a police officer. She saw a person blinded by bias, a man who had let his ego and prejudice dictate his actions. She took another step forward, her posture unwavering. The sound of sirens cut through the tense silence, and Lena's eyes flicked to the approaching convoy. It was a motorcade carrying high-ranking officials, including the Secretary of Defense. Michael glanced over his shoulder, distracted by the approaching vehicles. It was the moment Lena had been waiting for. Without hesitation, she moved forward, her eyes still fixed on the weapon in his hand. "You're obstructing someone who plays an important role in this event," she said. "I advise you to think carefully about your next move." As the motorcade came to a stop, General Jack Marshall, a prominent figure in national security, stepped out and immediately recognized Lena. "Colonel Matthews," he called, his voice a mix of surprise and respect. Michael turned to him, bewildered. "You know her?" he asked, his voice full of doubt. "Of course I know her," Marshall replied, his tone sharp. "Put the gun down now, Officer Owens." The officer hesitated, his face pale. "But she's not wearing a uniform." Marshall's expression hardened. "That's no excuse for what you've done. Colonel Matthews is one of the most respected officers in this country, and you just threatened her with a weapon." Lena said nothing, allowing Marshall's words to stand for her. The truth was clear, and there was no need for further explanation. Michael was now facing the consequences of his own actions. The situation quickly escalated, and within moments, Michael Owens found himself disarmed and surrounded by senior officials. His actions were inexcusable, and his career was already unraveling. Later that afternoon, he found himself in the sheriff's office, sitting nervously before Sheriff Dawson, who had just reviewed the security footage and the public outcry that had followed the incident. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" Sheriff Dawson asked, his voice cold as he slid a thick file across the desk. It was filled with evidence of Michael's behavior, reports, videos, and complaints from witnesses. "I was just following procedure," Michael muttered, his voice weak. Dawson slammed his fist onto the desk. "No, you weren't. You abused your power, and you discriminated against someone based on their appearance. Colonel Matthews has dedicated her life to serving this country, and you treated her like an enemy." The fallout from the incident was swift and unforgiving. Michael Owens, once just another police officer on duty, had now become a symbol of the deep-seated issues of prejudice and power abuse within law enforcement. Within days, the story made headlines across the nation, drawing both praise and outrage. Sheriff Dawson made a public statement, extending an official apology to Colonel Lena Matthews and condemning Officer Owens' behavior. The media frenzy that followed was both a reflection of the outrage felt by many and the immense responsibility placed on Lena's shoulders. At a press conference, Sheriff Dawson stood before the cameras, flanked by several high-ranking officials, including General Marshall and Lena. The press flashes were constant, but Lena kept her posture firm, her expression reserved. She was not there to relish in the apology. This was about sending a message. "On behalf of the police department," Dawson began, his voice steady, "I offer my sincerest apologies to Colonel Lena Matthews. What happened earlier today was completely unacceptable. It does not represent the values of this department, and we will be taking immediate steps to ensure this never happens again. Officer Owens will be suspended while we conduct a full investigation into his actions." Lena stood next to Marshall, her face stoic but her presence undeniable. She had fought too long, too hard, to let this be about her. It wasn't about her at all. It was about the change that needed to happen, the systemic issue that needed to be addressed. "I'm not angry at Officer Owens," Lena later stated in an interview, her voice calm yet resolute. "I am disappointed. Disappointed that we still live in a world where someone can be treated this way based on their appearance, their skin color, or their gender. But I also believe this can be an opportunity for change." Her words struck a chord with the public. While many expressed their shock and disgust at Owens' actions, others found hope in Lena's ability to rise above the situation with grace and dignity. Social media buzzed with messages of support, and many shared their own stories of prejudice and discrimination, with Lena's example serving as a beacon of strength. Meanwhile, Officer Owens was facing his own personal reckoning. He was dismissed from the police department and swiftly became a target of public criticism. Friends, family, and colleagues distanced themselves from him as the video footage of his altercation with Lena spread. The online community turned him into a symbol of everything wrong with the police force, and he was relentlessly mocked and condemned. Even his former colleagues, who had once respected him, now looked at him with disdain. But Owens wasn't just a scapegoat. His story reflected a broader issue that society was unwilling to ignore. The calls for police reform reached a fever pitch, with activists demanding greater accountability, better diversity training, and more stringent regulations on the use of force. Lena's story had sparked a national conversation, and it was one that was long overdue. Weeks passed, and the dust began to settle. Lena returned to her duties. But the reverberations of that fateful day were felt far beyond the walls of the conference hall. She was invited to participate in multiple panel discussions about the military's relationship with law enforcement, especially concerning issues of racism, bias, and respect for authority. At one such panel, Lena stood before a room full of military officers, law enforcement leaders, and community advocates. The conversation was tense, but it was also necessary. She was asked about the incident with Officer Owens, and she spoke candidly. "I'm not here to condemn Officer Owens," she began, her voice strong and unwavering. "I'm here to talk about the bigger issue. This isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that still has a long way to go in addressing bias, prejudice, and the abuse of power." Lena paused for a moment, letting her words settle in. She had a deep understanding of the challenge ahead. As much as she had succeeded in her military career, as much as she had seen progress in her lifetime, there were still battles to be fought, battles that, in many ways, she had yet to win. Officer Owens was wrong. "But we can't change that if we don't start having difficult conversations," Lena continued. "This incident should be a wake-up call for all of us. It's a reminder that the work isn't over. It's a reminder that our institutions need to evolve." The audience was silent. No one was immune to the reality Lena was presenting. Change was never easy, but Lena had the courage to confront it head-on. Months passed, and the police department began to implement new policies aimed at addressing concerns raised by Lena's case. Officers were required to undergo racial sensitivity training, and efforts to increase diversity within the force became a priority. The department also promised to establish better protocols for handling incidents of misconduct, with a clear emphasis on accountability and transparency. Lena, for her part, remained an unwavering advocate for these changes. She continued to speak at conferences, sharing her experiences and insights, all the while reminding her audience that this was not just a moment in time. It was part of an ongoing journey toward a fairer, more just society. Meanwhile, Michael Owens struggled to come to terms with the consequences of his actions. His once promising career was in ruins, and he was left to face the reality of his mistakes. He attempted to apologize publicly, but his words rang hollow. The public had already made their judgment, and the damage was done. Lena, however, remained focused on the future. She didn't need Michael Owens' apology, and she didn't need to see him fall further to feel validated. She knew that this was bigger than one person. It was about creating a world where respect wasn't earned through fear or intimidation, but through the acknowledgement of one's inherent worth. She had fought for over 3 decades to earn her place at the table, and she wasn't about to let anyone define her value. As Lena stood before the podium at the next National Security Conference, she felt a quiet sense of pride. The crowd around her respected her not because of her title, but because of her character. She had stood firm in the face of adversity, and in doing so, she had inspired others to do the same. The story of Lena Matthews and Officer Michael Owens became a cornerstone of a larger movement for change. It sparked conversations across the country and within the institutions of law enforcement. Public pressure continued to build, forcing both the police and military to confront uncomfortable truths about discrimination, bias, and the treatment of others. Lena's work was far from over, but the story of that day, of the woman who stood her ground when threatened, became a testament to the resilience of those who refused to be silenced. It was a reminder that courage wasn't always about taking a fight to the front lines. Sometimes, it was about standing still in the face of injustice, knowing that your presence alone was a force that could not be denied. And so, Lena Matthews' legacy continued, not just as a decorated military officer, but as a symbol of the quiet strength that changes the world.